Hello, hello. Welcome to Tuesdays with Kamira. I am Kamira, and our guest today is Garrett Brand. We're going to be talking youth activism. Garrett is fresh off of speaking with the Atlanta City Council last night. He is 19 years old, so he's just at the tail end of being a teen, and he's going to talk to us about his youth activism journey and how we as adults and youth lives can help nurture and support them if this is something that they are leaning towards. But first, before we get into it, I have to let everybody know that I am over the moon excited because our guest is my son. So the first time
It's true.
somebody, he says it's true, he verified it. Look at that in public.
It's true.
It's the first time anybody in my household has agreed to come on, so this is exciting for me. Welcome, Garrett. Thank you. Thank you very much for agreeing to come to this, and congratulations on your speech yesterday.
Thank you. Thank you, Mother.
For the purpose of this discussion, we're going to define youth activism as youth engagement in community organizing for social change. So it's not a specific issue. We're not talking about whether people are progressive or conservative or someplace in between. What we're talking about is youth who are engaged in community activism and organizing for social change and whatever they feel is pertinent. And you have been doing this for a minute.
Yeah, for in sort of the an organized capacity, not that long, really, just like this past semester of college, really, but been sort of peripherally involved and passionate about the issues and things like that for a long time.
I want to remind people, if you wish to dialogue with Garrett, you can put comments in the comment section and we will put them up and he will talk to you live if you're watching us on Tuesday at noon. Why don't we begin with Garrett? You tell us a little bit about yourself and your path to activism.
Sure. Yeah, as said, I am 19 years old. I just got done with my first year of college. Um, I go to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. Um, this past semester, I got involved with a couple of student activism organizations. Sunrise are the Brown chapter of the Sunrise Movement, which is environmental activism group that's sort of nationwide and has a lot of branches at different colleges, and a Brown specific group called Students for Educational Equity, which advocates for educational equity and everything that means. Um, in addition, I've recently, like last night when I was at City Hall, gotten involved with the activism movement around Stop Cop City here in Atlanta, where we both live. Um, and yeah, really, a lot of it comes from my coursework. I study sociology and urban studies, specifically focused around inequalities in society, particularly interested in criminal justice reform and education reform. Um, but yeah, it's really been, I think it's been sort of an inevitable lifelong like path. Um, I think you can definitely agree, having mothered me, that like since I was very young, I've exhibited like a passion for social justice topics and things like that, and it's been like a part of my life. But I didn't really know how to exactly focus or organize that until joining some specific organizations that taught me sort of like the organizing skills and techniques that I've picked up recently.
Okay. For the parents out there, if you have late high school students or early college students, I just want you to know that every time he says what he's studying or potentially majoring in, it is tweaked and a little different. So it's new for me as it is new for you. I find that fascinating. Were there people, well, actually, let's back up a little bit, because activism for my generation is different from what activism is for your generation. So why don't you tell us, what does it look like for you and your peers?
Right. Well, yeah, it's definitely different. We have the internet, which enables a lot more things, right? Like back in the day, I mean, Brown is a great example of this. There's a long history of student activism, but I feel like things were a lot more isolated. It was harder to communicate, right? Um, Whereas, like with the internet now, things are able to go national really easily. Like the whole Stop Cop City movement is a very specific local Atlanta issue, right? Very local politics, but it's people are talking about it at Brown and all across the country and stuff because we have the internet. Um, but a lot of specifically what it looks like is a lot of um, sort of bureaucratic organizations going to meetings every week, staying late, sitting around in a circle with all of like people on my team and figuring out, okay, so how are we going to organize this rally? And where are we going to get the cardboard for these signs from? And oh, did we contact the school? Do we even want to contact the school and let them know that we're going to do this? How much can we escalate without, you know, risking getting expelled from school? Do we is that a risk that some of us are comfortable taking versus others not? Are we comfortable putting the people of color in these groups and more some of the more dangerous situations where you might encounter police versus some of the white members of these groups? Um, Things like that, like sort of very organizational, just um, tendencies, right?
So one of the differences is, you mentioned, is having social media and the internet. Is social media activism a thing for your generation, and how do you view it? Because I hear a lot of people in my generation downplay the importance of it. Do you guys think it's important, or is it a tool, or am I way off base?
Social media is like a very critical tool for a lot of youth activist movements. Like, it's how it's the main information channel, really. Sort of internally within organizations, obviously, we have our own methods of communication and things like that, in different applications and things like that, just like any group. But in terms of like public information channels, it's all through social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook for the older minded folks out there. Um, things like that, like that's how information is shared, especially information that's not easily accessible. Like I was just at City Hall yesterday. It's purposefully inaccessible information about the procedure to sign up for public comment at a city council meeting. The only reason I even knew where to show up, when to show up, what to do is because of things shared on Instagram, right? So it's definitely a transformational tool for social activism. There is a sector of people my age who um, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but their only engagement with activism or anything like that is reposting like infographics and things like that, which definitely plays a role because every repost counts and getting the word out is a thing. But there's definitely sort of like a negative stigma against people who just, you know, repost things on like their Instagram story or things like that instead of being like actually involved with organizations. Um, which I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We need people to repost, and not everybody can be deeply involved, of course. But there is something to be said for people claiming involvement when really they're just, you know, like pushing buttons on social media.
Gotcha. Were there particular teachers or activities or things that tipped you in the direction towards activism, as opposed to maybe just being a keyboard activist, or not being interested in that type of activity at all?
Definitely. I can talk about a couple things here. First, I'll talk about what pushed me to really get involved with student activism in college. Is I my first semester I took introductory sociology, and in that class we talked about a lot of things, and we read a book about environmental sociology and climate crisis. And after reading that, prior to it, I wasn't as educated as I should have been about climate change and things like that in the climate crisis. Um, and that really spurred me to want to get involved with Sunrise specifically at Brown. And then I also got involved with Students for Educational Equity because we have an activist coalition and things like that, which made joining organizations really easy. But yeah, so definitely my activist involvement stems directly from my coursework. But that's because I'm a social sciences student who studies inequalities and social problems specifically, right? That is what I get to cater my schedules to every semester in college. And also, I went to a high school where I was able to take classes about like American Black history and things like that, which enabled me to think about these things and sort of like foster a passion for activism, things like that. And not everybody has that opportunity in their coursework, unfortunately. In terms of like activities, I mean, I've done debate since my sophomore year of high school, and I still do it in college. And like, I waited 9 hours in City Hall yesterday to give a speech, and I felt extremely prepared and confident to write and deliver that speech because of years and years of debate experience doing pretty much exactly what I did last night, um, which is, get up for 6 minutes at a time or whatever and give a speech arguing a position about something that you feel strongly about. So I think, yeah, my background in terms of like school and extracurriculars and stuff like that has definitely positioned me very well to be an organizer.
How can parents or guardians of tweens and teens support them if we see that, or they mention that they want to be engaged in some issue or activism of a certain type?
Take them to things, right? Um, like I feel like a lot of the barrier for a lot of high schoolers, probably in particular, is just like a lack of exposure or not knowing like where to start. A lot of kids may feel, I really care about this thing. I really care about protecting the climate, or I really care about healthcare inequalities, or I really care about criminal justice reform, or whatever it may be, but not know necessarily what to do with that passion. And that's where some of these like activities and adult guided things can really come in, is like um, being an informed citizen yourself and saying like, okay, uh, my 10th grader or whatever has expressed concerns about um, education funding. I'm going to take them to the city hall meeting where they're talking about the education budget and stuff like that. Um, and just really being on top of that, always encouraging activist and volunteer opportunities, like at all stages of a kid's development, um, and not being. I feel like a really large discouraging factor for a lot of people is the sort of um, like talking down to that can happen, of like, oh, you're just a naive kid, you don't know what you're talking about. This especially comes out when like a kid's passion sort of clashes with adult opinions. Is like, oh, you're young, you just haven't seen the world, like you just want you don't understand, right? Like just do your homework or whatever. And that can be really discouraging and really get people to not get involved with things like that. Can also go the other way, and it can spur people to get angry and get more motivated to figure it out themselves. But definitely, even if your kid says something you disagree with, listen to them and maybe engage with it instead of just shutting it down.
Okay, so you mentioned, I'm going to do a mom thing here and ask you to stop swiveling in your chair because we can hear the chair. So, okay, I'm never going to hear the end of that one. But you mentioned that we parents can take our kids to things, right?
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that if they were interested in education, like taking them to the city council meeting when they're talking about budgeting for public education, what other type of things would be good? Because what we think that would be interesting or educational may not be what is there.
Uh,
Or maybe we don't know. Maybe I, as a parent, have never been involved in community organizing and stuff, and I have a child who wants to be, and I don't know where to start. So, what kind of things?
Local volunteer opportunities are always a pretty accessible way to start, I would think. Um, Most places, wherever you live, you have a local chapter of something or some organization doing some sort of social work to help people, whether it's feeding homeless people or, um, you know, collecting school supplies for under-resourced schools, whatever like that. So just volunteering with organizations like that and seeing how you can get more and more involved if it's something that sticks for you and or your kid, right? Um, and a lot of that can be, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of this can be found through social media nowadays. That's usually the easiest way to find these things. Um, but you could even just like Google like nonprofit organizations near me, volunteer organizations near me, and then go find them on social media and see like when their next meeting or event that you can show up for is. Um, yeah.
Is youth activism, we see a lot of reports that youth activism is on the rise and that your generation is doing more than previous generations. Do you feel this? And do your peers, do you guys talk about it? Not just now that you're in college where a lot of people expect this to happen, but also, in previous years when you were in high school or maybe even junior high school.
Yeah, I think people my age are starting to realize that like oh, a lot of old people really don't care about us or our futures at all, so we have to do it ourselves, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think one of the clearest example of this is in terms of climate crisis, right? It's like, oh, maybe when I'm 60 years old, there won't really be a habitable planet, right? Nobody will be able to go to vacations in Florida or live in Florida or New Orleans or whatever like that. Um, and it's like that would be really bad. We don't want that to happen. We don't so we have to act now, right? We can't wait to get older. We have to be 14, 15, 16, whatever, on the front lines of marches and protests in city councils, in Congress, whatever, making our voices heard through whatever means necessary. Because, like, I feel like we are at very many, many very pivotal, like, intersectional moments in terms of the different issues facing the country and the world right now. And I feel like that is galvanizing a new generation of activists that is more determined than previous ones. And I think a lot of that can also be attributed to the internet and social media making these things more accessible, right? There's just more information flow than there ever has been before.
Okay. And I know that this can be individually specific, but in general, do young activists want adult input and participation, or do you want us to stand back and let you do?
I think it's very situationally dependent. Like
Mhm.
in my experience, there are some times when absolutely having adults involved is legitimizing and like necessary, and that's something we want. But and there's sometimes when it's just necessary. Like in high school, you can't do a lot of the things yourself. You're just not equipped as a person to organize entire um like groups and events and protests and stuff like that because you're like 15 and you're in algebra 2 or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
in college definitely like we're entirely student led, right? Um but it so yeah, there is definitely a role for adults to play, but I think a very critical part of it is not making it about the adults and not becoming the focal point of any of the organizations or anything like that, and letting the student voices shine through the adults, right?
Mhm. I love that because sometimes, especially if the adult, a parent maybe, is also an activist, sometimes you can take over, and we have to be careful not to take over.
Right.
Okay, is there something that I have missed that you think that adults and caregivers need to know if they have budding activists or current activists, or just in case it's on the horizon? Is there something that we haven't addressed yet that you really think we should know?
I would just say just encourage it and nurture it because the more the better, right? Like it's that's I think a kid being very passionate about social issues is not something to that should be discouraged in any way. I think that's something that should be fostered and grown no matter how it takes shape. Maybe it can be guided into the most productive channels, but that's my number one thing that I want people to take away from anything is just nurture that and don't shut it down.
Okay. So my last question is always, and I think you just answered it, but just in case, if people only remember one thing from the 20 minutes that we've been in conversation, what should that one thing be?
Yeah, just set it. Just
Yeah,
nurture the activist spirit.
I love that. And I love you. Thank you for being here with me. I
Yes,
am
mom.
so excited. Did you hear that? Oh, we have a comment. I'm going to put it up. The
Mm.
comment says, as a Gen X parent, I am so proud of your generation and you give me so much hope for our country's future. Does your generation feel a sense of hope?
Yes, I would say it's there is a lot of pessimism and a lot of r- realism about the forces that stand in opposition to a lot of activist movements, and a lot of understanding that these are big goals. These are big things to tackle, and there are powerful people who stand in the way. But there is overwhelmingly a sense of hope that with enough people, with enough organization, with enough effort, it can be done. And that's why all of these people all that's why activists come together. Activists wouldn't show up. We wouldn't show up to our meetings every week, every day. Sometimes we wouldn't show up to protests. We wouldn't write our speeches and things like that if we didn't have some sort of hope that there was change to be made, because then there wouldn't be a point.
It's a great question. Thank you, Nicole. It's a great question to end on, unless someone has another one. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, this Tuesday. We look forward to speaking with another guest next Tuesday. And we thank you, Mr. Garrett Brand, for joining us and coming
Thank
hot
you.
off of your speech with the Atlanta City Council.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.